The cold didn't arrive suddenly. It had been there for days, settling into the ground, into the air, into the bodies of everyone who walked that land. But that morning, it felt different, heavier, sharper. The kind of cold that doesn't just surround you, it enters you. The tribe stood near the river, not speaking, not moving much, just watching. The surface was frozen in parts, broken in others, a thin layer of ice shifting slowly with the current beneath it. And under that ice, life moved. Hundreds of salmon. Maybe more. Their bodies cutting through the dark water, pushing upstream against a force that never stopped. They followed instinct, a path older than memory. And the tribe knew that path. They had seen it before. They had waited for it. But waiting was the hardest part. The younger ones shifted their weight, their eyes fixed on the water, hands tight around their tools. They wanted to move, to step in, to take advantage of what was right in front of them. But the elders didn't move, not yet. Because this wasn't just about catching fish. It was about doing it right. One wrong step, one sound out of place, and everything below would scatter. The current would pull them apart, and what looked like abundance would disappear into nothing. That was the difference between hunger and survival. The wind passed across the open land, cutting through fur and skin, carrying the sound of the river with it. A low, constant movement under the ice. The tribe listened to it, not with ears alone, but with attention. They watched the flow, the narrow points where the water tightened, the places where movement compressed. That's where it would happen. Not in the open, not in the wide sections, but where the river forced everything closer together. One of the elders stepped forward slightly, not enough to break the stillness, just enough to change the space. His eyes didn't leave the water, his body didn't rush. He was reading something the others couldn't fully see yet. The rhythm, the moment. Because in that world, timing wasn't important. It was everything. The ice shifted again, a small crack running across the surface before stopping. The sound echoed lightly, then disappeared. The fish below didn't scatter. That mattered. The elder took another step. Slow. Controlled. Testing the ground beneath him. The others watched. No one followed yet, because until he moved fully, nothing would begin. The cold pressed harder now, the kind that made fingers slower, reactions heavier, but no one reacted to it. They stood through it, because the cold wasn't the enemy. Mistiming was... The river moved. The fish pushed. The moment built. And the tribe waited. Because once it started, there would be no stopping. Only action. Only precision. Only survival. No one stepped forward yet. Even with the fish moving just beneath the ice, even with the opportunity right there, within reach, the tribe stayed still. It didn't make sense for someone watching from outside. Why wait when food was right there? But they knew. Moving too early would ruin everything. The younger hunters shifted again, their feet pressing into the snow, their eyes locked on the darker sections of the river where the movement was strongest. They could see it now more clearly. The salmon weren't scattered. They were tightening, following the current into narrower paths. That was the moment they wanted. But it wasn't ready yet. One of the younger ones leaned forward slightly, almost stepping out of line. His grip tightened around his tool, his body ready to act. He could already imagine the first catch, the impact, the movement. Before he could move, a hand stopped him. Firm. Without force. Just enough. He looked up. The elder didn't say anything. Didn't need to. His eyes stayed on the water. That was the message. Not yet. The younger one pulled back slowly, his breath visible in the cold air, frustration mixing with discipline. He wasn't wrong to want to act. But wanting wasn't enough. In that place, knowing when not to act was what kept him alive. The wind passed again, sharper this time, cutting across the surface of the river. A thin layer of snow lifted slightly, drifting over the ice, covering parts of the surface. For a moment, visibility changed. Then returned. The fish were still there, still moving, but now more concentrated. The current had shifted slightly, pushing more of them toward a narrower channel. The water there was darker, faster, more controlled, less space to move, less room to escape. That's what they needed. The elder took another step forward, closer to the edge. The ice beneath him made a low sound, not breaking, but reacting. He paused, waited, listened. The crack didn't spread. The surface held. That was enough. He moved again. Now the others followed. Not all at once. One by one. Each step placed exactly where his had been. No deviation. No improvisation. Because the ground here wasn't just unstable. It was unpredictable. A wrong step wouldn't just slow them. It could end everything. They spread out slightly along the edge of the narrow channel, forming a loose line. Not too wide, not too close, just enough to control the space without crowding it. Each one took position. Each one waited. The tools were ready now. Held low, close to the body. No sudden movement. No noise. The river moved beneath them, stronger now, pushing against the ice, against the edges of the channel. The fish followed that force, packed tighter, forced into proximity. The moment was forming. Not forced, not rushed. Natural. And that's what made it work. The elder looked down one last time, watching the movement, feeling the rhythm. Then he lifted his tool. Not high, not fast, just enough. And in that motion, everyone understood. The waiting was over. Now, everything had to be exact. The movement didn't start with chaos. It started with precision. The elder brought the tool down against the ice, not with full force, but with control. The impact echoed low across the frozen surface, a sharp crack spreading outward before stopping. The ice didn't shatter completely, it opened just enough. That was the goal. Not to destroy the surface, but to create access. The dark water below became visible instantly, moving fast, carrying the compressed mass of salmon beneath it. The fish reacted, their bodies shifting tighter together, pressing into the narrower space that had just been created. That reaction mattered. It made them predictable. The elder stepped back slightly, giving space. That was the signal. The others moved. Fast now, but not rushed. Each hunter struck the ice along the same line, breaking it in sections, expanding the opening just enough to control the flow without losing it. The cracks connected, forming a channel where the water pushed harder, faster, tighter. The river wasn't free anymore. It was guided. The sound of breaking ice filled the space, mixing with the low rush of water and the movement beneath it. Snow slid into the openings, instantly melting at the edges before freezing again in uneven layers. Everything was unstable. Everything required attention. One of the hunters stepped too far forward, his foot pressing into a weaker section of ice. It dipped slightly under his weight, a warning more than a failure. He froze. Didn't move. Waited. The surface held. Barely. He shifted back slowly, resetting his position. That was the difference. No panic. No sudden reaction. Just correction. The fish below were now fully compressed into the channel. Their movement had changed from scattered motion to forced direction. They no longer had space to avoid. They had to pass through. That's when the first catch happened. One of the hunters moved his tool into the water, fast and direct, not swinging wildly, placing it. The movement was clean, efficient, controlled. Then he pulled back. A salmon. Large. Heavy. Still moving. He didn't stop to look. Didn't react. He placed it behind him in the snow and moved again. The others followed. Now the rhythm began. Strike. Lift. Place. Repeat. Each movement aligned with the current, not against it. They didn't chase the fish. They intercepted them. That was the difference. The river kept pushing. The fish kept coming. And the tribe adjusted with it. The cold made everything harder. Hands slowed. Muscles tightened. The water at the edges froze quickly, forming thin layers that broke again with movement. But no one stopped. Because now, the moment was active, And once active, it couldn't be wasted. The pile behind them started to grow, at first slowly, then faster, fish after fish, each one taken cleanly, each one added to survival. The sound changed again. Not just ice, not just water, but impact, repetition, work. And that work had meaning. Because this wasn't just food. This was time. Days, weeks, maybe more. Everything they did in those moments would decide how long they could last. The elder didn't stop moving, didn't slow, but his eyes stayed on the flow, constantly adjusting, constantly reading the changes. Because even now, the moment could shift. And if it did, everything would have to change with it. The river moved, the fish pushed, the tribe worked, and the first break had become something much bigger. It had become survival in motion. Now it wasn't about starting anymore, it was about maintaining. The opening in the ice had turned the river into a controlled channel, and the fish were moving exactly where the tribe needed them. But that control didn't last forever. The current could shift, the ice could close, the flow could change direction without warning. So every second mattered. The hunters moved in rhythm now. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Each one focused on a narrow section of water, not looking around, not reacting to what others were doing. They didn't need to. The system was already in place. One caught, placed it behind, moved again. Another did the same. Then another. The pile behind them grew steadily, bodies of salmon stacking against the snow, their movement slowing as the cold took over. Steam rose lightly where water met air, disappearing almost as quickly as it formed. The river fought back. The current pushed harder against the opening, forcing the water through faster, trying to break the structure they had created. Thin layers of ice began forming again at the edges, tightening the space, changing the angle of flow. The elder saw it first. Of course he did. He stepped to the side and struck the edge again, reopening the space just enough. Not too much, just enough to keep the pressure where they needed it. The others adjusted immediately. No words, no delay, just movement. That's what kept it working. One of the younger hunters tried to speed up. His movements became sharper, faster, less controlled. He struck too early, missing the flow, his tool hitting water instead of fish. The splash disrupted the surface, sending a small group scattering. He stopped, reset, adjusted, and returned to rhythm. That was the rule. Speed didn't matter. Precision did. The cold made every motion heavier now. Hands were slower, grip tighter, muscles working harder than they should. But no one reacted to it. The body adapted. It had to, because stopping meant losing position. And losing position meant losing everything. The numbers kept rising. Dozens. Then, more. The pile was no longer small. It had weight now. It mattered. It represented time. Survival measured in quantity. One of the hunters stepped back briefly, dragging part of the pile further from the edge, making space for more. He didn't carry everything, just enough to clear the area. Efficiency. Nothing wasted. Nothing overdone. The river continued to push. The fish continued to come. And the tribe stayed with it. The sky above remained empty, pale and distant, offering no sign of change. But that didn't mean anything. In that place, change didn't announce itself. It just happened. The elder looked up for a fraction of a second. Then back down. Still focused. Still in control. But aware. Always aware. Because the harvest wasn't safe. It was just necessary. And necessity doesn't protect you. The ice shifted again. A deeper sound this time. Not breaking, but warning. The elder stepped forward again, adjusting position, striking once more to maintain the opening. The structure held. Barely, but enough. The hunters didn't stop, didn't question, didn't hesitate. Because now they were inside the moment. And inside the moment, you don't think. You execute. The pile grew. The rhythm held. The cold pressed harder. But the tribe stayed with it. Because this wasn't just about catching fish. This was about how long they would live after the river froze again. And that made every movement matter. The pile behind them was no longer just a result. It had become a calculation. Every salmon placed on the snow meant time, days of food, strength for movement, energy against the cold. And the tribe knew exactly what that meant, even without counting out loud. They didn't celebrate it. They measured it. The hunters kept moving in rhythm, but now there was something else in their actions. Not urgency, but awareness of limit. Because taking everything wasn't the goal. Taking enough was. The river still pushed hard through the opening, the current forcing more fish into the channel. The movement below hadn't slowed. If anything, it had intensified. More bodies, tighter flow, faster pressure. It would have been easy to keep going without stopping. But that would be a mistake. One of the hunters stepped back again, dragging more fish away from the edge, clearing space so the others could keep working without interruption. His movements were slower now, heavier, the cold starting to show in his arms. He didn't stop. He placed the fish further into the snow, stacking them where they wouldn't interfere with the flow of work. Organization. Even here, even now, the elder watched everything. Not just the river, not just the fish, the people, their movement, their speed, their condition. Because the danger wasn't just losing the fish, it was losing control of the body. Fatigue changes timing. And timing was everything. He stepped forward again, this time not to strike the ice, but to adjust the line. He shifted one of the hunters slightly, just a step to the side, opening more space where the current had tightened again. The change was immediate. More fish passed through that point. More opportunity. More gain. But also more risk. The younger hunters felt it. The abundance. The pressure. The chance to take more. But they didn't rush. Not anymore. They had learned that lesson already. The rhythm held. Strike. Lift. Place. Repeat. The sound of it blended into the environment, becoming part of the river, part of the wind, part of the cold. Time passed. Not tracked, but felt, until something changed. The flow began to shift. Subtle, but real. The fish were still there, but the pressure was slightly different. The current adjusted its path just enough to reduce the compression. The channel was still working, but not at the same level. The elder saw it, and that was the moment. He raised his hand, not high, not sudden, just enough. The movement passed through the group instantly. One by one, the hunters slowed, then stopped. No argument, no hesitation. They stepped back from the edge, leaving the opening behind. The river continued. The fish continued. But the tribe didn't. Because they knew more wasn't better. Enough was survival. They turned to the pile now, and for the first time since it began, they looked at what they had taken. Hundreds. Enough to matter. Enough to last. Enough to survive what was coming. The wind passed again, colder now. The sky beginning to shift as the light changed slightly. The day wasn't over, but the moment was, and in that place, knowing when to stop was just as important as knowing when to begin. The river kept moving. The fish kept pushing upstream. Nothing in that world had stopped. Only the tribe had. And that decision mattered more than anything they had just done. They stepped away from the edge slowly, each one creating distance between themselves and the opening in the ice. Not out of fear, but out of discipline. The moment was over. Staying there longer would only increase risk. Now the focus changed. From catching to carrying. The pile of salmon in the snow was heavy. Not just in weight, in meaning. Each one had to be moved, organized, transported, because leaving them there was not an option. The cold preserved, but it also exposed. Anything left unattended in that open space could be taken by scavengers, by predators, by anything that survived in that land. One of the hunters crouched, grabbing 2 fish at once, lifting them with effort. The bodies were stiff already at the edges, the cold working fast. He turned and began walking toward the higher ground where the camp was set. The others followed, each carrying what they could. No one tried to take too much. That would slow them down, and slowing down meant losing more than gaining. The snow resisted their steps again, deeper now away from the river's edge. The ground wasn't compacted here. Every step sank further, pulling at their legs, making each movement harder. But they didn't stop. They couldn't, because the longer they stayed exposed, the more they risked losing everything they had just gained. The wind picked up again, stronger now, cutting across the open field. It pushed against them, carrying loose snow into the air, reducing visibility slightly. The world began to close in, white on white. Movement becoming harder to track. That mattered, because out there, nothing stayed unnoticed for long. One of the hunters looked back briefly. Not toward the fish, toward the river. The opening in the ice was already changing. The edges beginning to freeze again, the current adjusting, the surface trying to reclaim itself. As if nothing had happened. As if the moment had never existed. That was how that land worked. It didn't remember. It reset, and if you weren't ready for the next moment, it would take you without hesitation. The tribe kept moving, step by step, load by load, the pile behind them slowly shrinking as they carried it towards safety. The camp was not far, but distance didn't matter here. Time did. The sky had begun to shift slightly, the light lowering, shadows stretching longer across the snow. The temperature would drop further soon. And with it, everything would become harder. The elder moved ahead of the group now, not carrying as much but watching the path. His eyes scanned constantly, not just the ground, but the horizon. Because this part was just as dangerous as the river. The tribe wasn't hunting anymore. They were carrying food. And carrying food changes everything. It makes you slower, more visible, more vulnerable. The wind carried scent. The snow carried tracks. And anything out there would notice. The hunters adjusted their formation again. Not tight, but aware, spacing themselves just enough to watch different angles, different directions. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The shift had already happened. The cold pressed harder now. The weight in their arms pulled more with each step. But they kept moving, because stopping wasn't an option. Not yet. Not until everything was secured. Not until the fire was built. Not until the food was protected. Because what they had done at the river meant nothing if they lost it on the way back. And in that world, that happens more often than people think. The distance to the camp wasn't far, but in that land, distance didn't matter. Condition did. The snow had changed. Away from the river, it was deeper, softer, less stable. Every step the hunters took sank further, forcing more effort, pulling energy from muscles that were already tired. The weight of the fish made it worse. What they carried now slowed them. And slowing down changed everything. The formation adjusted again. Not tight like before. Not scattered. Controlled. Each hunter kept space between the others, enough to see movement, enough to react if something came from the side. Their heads moved more now, scanning constantly, not just the path ahead, but the edges of the open land. Because this part was where mistakes happened. The river had focus. The camp had safety, but the path between had neither. The wind picked up again, stronger this time, cutting across their direction of movement. Snow lifted off the ground in thin layers, drifting sideways, reducing clarity. The horizon blurred slightly, shapes harder to distinguish at a distance. That mattered, because anything moving would be harder to see. One of the hunters slowed for a moment, adjusting his grip on the fish. The cold had stiffened his hands, his fingers slower to respond. He tightened his hold and kept moving. No one complained. No one stopped. Because this was expected. This was part of it. The elder moved slightly ahead, his eyes scanning the terrain constantly. He didn't look at the ground as much as the others. He looked outward. For movement. For change. For anything that didn't belong. Because carrying food meant you were no longer just surviving. You were a target. The tribe knew that. Every step they took left marks in the snow, clear, fresh, easy to follow, and what they carried left scent, strong, carried by the wind. That scent didn't disappear. It traveled, and anything out there would find it. The hunters didn't try to hide it. That wasn't possible. They controlled what they could. Speed, direction, awareness. One of them looked back again, not stopping, just turning his head slightly. The path behind them was already changing, the wind covering parts of their tracks, softening the edges. But not fast enough. Not yet. They needed distance. They needed time. The camp came into view slowly. Not all at once. First a shape. Then more. Low structures against the snow, partially covered, blending into the environment. Smoke barely visible, kept low to avoid attention. That was safety. But not complete safety. Not until they reached it. The final stretch was the hardest. The ground rose slightly, forcing more effort, more strain on legs that were already tired. The weight of the fish pulled down harder now, every step requiring more from the body. But they didn't slow. Not now. Not this close. The elder raised his hand briefly. Not to stop. To signal. The hunters adjusted again, tightening slightly as they approached the camp. Not out of fear, but out of habit. Because even here, nothing was guaranteed. They crossed the final distance. Step by step, until the snow beneath them changed. More compact. More stable. Trampled by repeated movement. They had reached it. But even then, they didn't relax. Not yet. Because bringing food back was only half of survival. Keeping it was the other half. And that part was just beginning. They crossed into the camp without noise. No celebration. No release of tension. Only movement. Because bringing the fish back was not the end. It was the transition. The moment they stepped onto the compacted ground, everything shifted again. Now the focus wasn't the outside. It was control inside. The fish were placed carefully, not thrown, not stacked randomly. Each one positioned where it could be processed quickly. Organization mattered now more than speed. A pile in the wrong place could freeze together, become harder to separate, harder to use. The tribe moved with purpose. Some immediately knelt beside the fish, beginning the work. Hands moving fast, cutting, cleaning, separating what would be used first from what would be stored. The cold helped preserve, but only if the work was done right. Others moved to the fire, or what would become one, because fire didn't exist yet. It had to be built. Carefully, protected from the wind, fed in the right order. One of the elders crouched low, using his body to block the air while another worked with dry material gathered earlier, small pieces first, then slightly larger, no rush, no wasted motion. A spark. Small, almost nothing. But enough. They shielded it immediately. The flame grew slowly. Then stronger. The wind tried to take it. But they didn't let it. They controlled it. Just like the river. Just like the hunt. Because fire was not just warmth. It was survival. The first fish were brought closer, not directly onto the flame, but near enough to begin the process. The heat changed the air around them, creating a contrast against the cold that surrounded the camp. Steam rose. Light. Temporary. The smell followed. And that mattered, because scent travels, even here, even now. But they accepted it, because without fire, nothing else worked. Nearby, another group worked with something different. Grain, crushed earlier, stored carefully, mixed now with small amounts of water, slowly, by hand, forming a thick paste. Primitive, simple, but essential. They shaped it into flat pieces, placing them on heated stone near the fire, not directly in flame. Controlled heat, even cooking, nothing wasted. This wasn't food for taste. It was fuel, energy, something that could last longer, carry strength further. The tribe moved around each other without confusion, each one knowing their role, their position, their timing. No one gave orders, no one needed to, because they had done this before. And doing it right was the only option. The fire grew stronger now. Stable. Reliable. The first pieces of bread hardened slightly, the surface changing, the inside still soft. The fish began to cook slowly, the flesh firming under heat, becoming something that could sustain them longer. One of the hunters stepped back slightly, scanning the edge of the camp again. Even here, the outside mattered. The work didn't stop, but awareness stayed. Always. Because the fire gave life, but also gave signal. The wind shifted again, carrying warmth, carrying scent, carrying everything they had just created into the open land beyond. And in that world, nothing stayed unnoticed for long. But still, they continued, because stopping wasn't an option. Not until everything was ready. Not until every piece had purpose. Not until survival was secured. For as long as it could be, the fire had stabilized, low, controlled, exactly how it needed to be, not large enough to be seen from far away, but strong enough to do its job. The tribe stayed close, forming a loose circle around it, each person positioned with purpose. No one crowded the flame, no one blocked the heat unnecessarily. Everything had a place, everything had a reason. The first pieces of fish were ready. Not perfectly cooked, not carefully prepared for taste, but done enough, done to survive. One of the elders took the first portion, not because of status, because of responsibility. He tested it, not with hesitation, but with understanding, temperature, texture, timing. Then he ate, slow, controlled, and that was the signal. The others followed. No rush, no grabbing. Each one taking what was given, not more, not less, because this wasn't abundance. It was distribution. Each bite mattered, not just in that moment, but for what came after. The bread followed, flat, dense, still warm from the heated stone. It wasn't soft like something made for comfort. It was firm, compact, built to last, built to carry strength into the next day. The hunters ate in silence, not because they were told to, because speaking wasted breath, and breath, in that cold, was energy. Their bodies reacted immediately. The warmth of the food spread slowly, pushing back against the cold that had settled deep inside them. Muscles began to loosen slightly, the tension in their hands eased. The sharp edge of exhaustion softened just enough to continue. But no one relaxed. Not fully. Because eating wasn't the end. It was preparation. One of the hunters looked at the remaining pile. Still large. Still valuable. But already being divided. Some would be eaten now. Some would be dried. Some would be stored where the cold would preserve it naturally. Nothing would be wasted. Nothing could be wasted. The wind shifted again, passing over the camp, carrying the scent of cooked food outward. It moved fast, spreading through the open land, touching everything beyond their immediate space. One of the hunters noticed. Of course he did. He lifted his head slightly, eyes scanning the horizon. Nothing. For now. But that didn't mean safety. It never did. The tribe continued eating. Slow. Measured. Each person taking in exactly what they needed. Not more, because eating too much slowed the body. And a slow body didn't survive long out there. The fire cracked lightly, small sounds breaking the silence for a moment before fading again. The light from it reflected off the snow, creating a low glow that didn't travel far. That mattered. Everything here was controlled. Everything limited, because excess created risk. The elder finished his portion and set the rest aside. Not done, just waiting, because the next part was already forming. Rest, not sleep. Not yet, but a moment to let the body take what it had been given, to convert food into strength, to prepare for what would come next, because in that world, there was always something next. The tribe remained still for a moment longer, not idle, recovering. Their breathing slowed, their posture eased slightly, but their awareness stayed, always, because even here, even after the hunt, even after the fire, even after the food, they were still inside a world that didn't forgive mistakes. And tomorrow would ask for everything again. The fire burned lower now, not because it was dying, but because it was controlled. Everything in that place had to be. The tribe didn't let the flames grow too high, didn't allow sparks to rise into the air where they could be seen from far away. Even light had to be managed. The night began to settle slowly, the sky darkening, the temperature dropping further. The cold that had been present all day now deepened into something heavier, something that pressed harder against the body, against the ground, against everything that existed in that space. The tribe stayed close, not gathered tightly, but aligned, each person positioned where they could feel the heat without losing awareness of the outside. No one turned their back fully to the open land. No one allowed themselves to be fully relaxed. Because this wasn't safety. It was preparation. The fish continued to be processed. Some cut into smaller pieces. Some laid out where the cold would preserve them. Others placed closer to the fire for drying. Each method had a purpose. Each piece of food assigned to a different future moment. Tomorrow, the next day, the days after that, survival wasn't about what you had now. It was about how long you could extend it. One of the hunters stood and moved slightly away from the fire, stepping toward the edge of the camp. His eyes scanned the darkness beyond, adjusting slowly to the low light. The horizon had changed. It was no longer white. It was black, endless, and everything beyond that line was unknown. The wind moved again, colder now, sharper, carrying less moisture, more bite. It passed through the camp, touching the fire, the food, the people. Nothing stopped it. Nothing could. But they endured it, because enduring was the rule. Not comfort, not ease, just continuation. The elder remained seated near the fire, his posture steady, his gaze not fixed on any one thing, but aware of everything at once. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The tribe followed the same pattern. Minimal movement, maximum awareness. The kind of stillness that isn't rest, but readiness. Time passed, slowly. Measured not by light, but by feeling. The body adjusting, the heat fading, the cold returning. Again and again, until everything settled into balance. The food was secured, the fire controlled, the tribe positioned. Nothing more could be done. For now, and that was the truth of that world. You do what you can, when you can, and then you wait, because no matter how prepared you are, the land always decides what comes next. The river would freeze again. The fish would stop moving. The cold would intensify. And something else would always be out there, watching, waiting. The tribe didn't try to control that. They couldn't. They controlled only themselves, their timing, their actions, their decisions, because that was the only thing that kept them alive. Not strength, not numbers, not even luck, but understanding when to act, when to stop, when to take, and when to leave. The fire burned low. The wind moved. The night settled completely. And the tribe remained. Not because they had conquered the land, but because, for one more day, they had moved with it. And in that world, that was the difference between living and disappearing without a trace